Hi, my name's Kat Pennington and my session is all about storytelling, and I've entitled it The Essential Beginning for Developing the Writer. There's actually 3 parts to this presentation, but each stand on their own, so if you only get to watch one, that's fine, but hopefully you'll decide to watch all 3. This first part is all about why we need to tell stories, how come it's so important to writing, and then the second part I model some storytelling, and in the third part it's about making sure storytelling is in our curriculum and storytelling for older children as well. So let's start thinking about why we need to tell stories. Well, storytelling has been around since the dawn of time. It's our oldest form of education. It was around before we even started writing. And what we know is story is a part of everybody's culture. It's something that can unite everyone. And there is a difference between reading a story to actually telling a story. And for our children to be able to write confidently, they need to be able to invent and create their own stories and tell their own stories. If they don't have a story to tell, what are they going to write about? We also know that humans, we're addicted to story. Story becomes everything that we do. And storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world today. We can look at a lot of the things that we hear in the news, that we see on the TV, film. They're all telling a story in a different way. So storytelling is fundamental to our culture, it's fundamental to our education, and it's fundamental to ensuring that children get a wide breadth of it. And ultimately, everyone has a story. And I can remember working with somebody who once told me everybody has something inside them that they can tell, and we shouldn't judge our own experiences for what we want a story to be about. Just because a child may have only had this, that and the other experience doesn't mean it's any less of a value to another child or yourselves that maybe have had different experiences. So everyone has a story, and it's important that through our education and through our provision we give them the opportunity to be able to tell that story. So let's start at the end. We're in year 6 and we say to the children, can you write me a story, year 6? Can you write one independently for me? And you see that ashen face come over them and they just don't know where to start. So we have to think, how's that possible? How have you got through to year 6 and you find it challenging to write a short story? Where are the stories within you? Where are the stories that you can tell and know? So why does this happen? Why do we have children heading up to upper key stage 2 finding it challenging to write a story? Well, one of the reasons is, with the late great Sir Ken Robinson, I think sometimes we can educate them out of the creativity. How often have you actually asked the children, can you tell me a story? Can you make up a story? But even more than that, when was the last time you invented a story in front of the children? You modelled how to make up a story? Or do we just expect this to kind of miraculously happen by the time they get to upper key stage 2? Asking a year 6 child, write me a story, when they haven't even practiced telling one, when they haven't even practiced inventing one, is going to be really challenging, particularly if we see writing as an application of the story that they can tell. So do we do enough of drama and playing and story invention and creating stories with our young people? Or do we focus too much on the getting it right and wrong of writing? Do they become fearful of writing? Because from one thing that we know is fear is a barrier to creativity. So your children scared about getting things wrong and equally have never had the opportunity to invent and create. And sometimes I don't think we teach it enough. I know many schools do very well, but do we teach storytelling and story invention enough? From my experience, I've seen a lot of schools teach transcription well. Transcription being the nuts and bolts, spelling, grammar, handwriting. So we see those things going on in classrooms, and sometimes we see these endless lists of grammatical terms that the children have to tick off in order to make or write a good story. Well, surely story is more than just a list of grammar. So it's making sure that we also teach composition, that we teach children how to become story writers. We go beyond teaching them to write, we create writers, and with that they need all the transcriptional elements which will ultimately liberate the composition. But children need to be story writers, and to be a story writer you need to be a storyteller. So we need to go back. So how do they become a storyteller? Well, we have to feed them. Because if they don't have anything and you multiply that by nothing, you're still going to get nothing. And what we know is imagination is just a manipulation of what you know. So if you don't know a lot, if you haven't been fed a lot, what's going to come out? So we need to think carefully as practitioners, what is their story diet? And what is the quality of their story diet? How often do your children in your school from early years through to year 6 get the opportunity to invent stories, make up a story, and then tell that story to somebody? How often do they get the opportunity to hear stories? Do they get the daily read aloud story of high quality literature? And what we know in our classrooms, we as knowledgeable teachers, we know that they need to hear Charlotte's Web, Stig of the Dump, The Iron Man. These need to be brought to the table of their lives. So make sure that that happens every single day. How often do they get to read stories? Do they read quality stories? Are they exposed to quality literature? When do they tell and perform their stories? Are there structures and routines that help this? When do they play with story? And when do they do drama? Proper drama to liberate the storyteller inside them. Because if they don't, we have to ask ourselves, what are they pulling on when they come to write a story? Because you can't create out of nothing. So one of the things to consider carefully is about the 5-part story. So from a very young age, what we would teach the children to do is to be able to tell a story using 5 parts. And for this, all we need is 5 cracking sentence starters. So once upon a time there was, insert a character who lived. Then we've got one day, unfortunately, fortunately, finally. So we can make little 1-sentence stories up using that, or we can make longer stories up, whole paragraphs around those sentences. But teaching children those 5-sentence starters, if you use them, you would create a nice little story. You could tell a nice little story. So I'm just going to show you now how you might do that in front of children.
Hello everybody. So let's make up a little story using this 5-part structure that we've seen in the PowerPoint. So as you can see, I've drawn my little story mountain. I've collected a bank of characters with the children. So I'd have asked them, what characters could we have in our story? Who could be the people? And let's imagine that they've come up with queen, fox, owl, ghost, dragon, girl, wolf. I've left off unicorn on this occasion, but I would have collected them on a flip chart and have them just to the side of my story mountain. I've also made the decision to put the key story language on my mountain, so although we're going to be orally doing this, they can still read or at least see the key language that I'm teaching them. So let's get going. Once upon a time there was, now let's just choose a character. Let's say we chose a little girl. Once upon a time there was a little girl who lived in a cottage. Let's just draw a little cottage. There's the little cottage. Once upon a time there was a little girl who lived in a cottage. One day she decided to go on an adventure. So let's have the big capital A and her going for a walk on adventure. Once upon a time there was a little girl who lived in a cottage. One day she decided to go on an adventure to the forest. Let's draw some forest. Unfortunately, in the forest she met let's choose another character. Who could she meet? Well, let's say she met a horrible, mean dragon. So there's our dragon. There's his eyes. Breathing fire. Once upon a time there was a little girl who lived in a cottage. One day she decided to go on an adventure into the forest. Unfortunately, in the forest she met a fire-breathing dragon. Fortunately, a helpful wolf came along. Let's draw a wolf. There's my wolf. Fortunately, a helpful wolf came along. She jumped on its back and ran all the way home. Finally, they had a nice cup of tea together. The end. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in the cottage. One day, she decided to go on an adventure into the forest. Unfortunately, in the forest, she met a fire-breathing dragon. Fortunately, along came a helpful, kind wolf. She jumped on the wolf's back and he carried her all the way back home. Finally, the wolf and the little girl had a nice cup of tea. The end.
Thank you. I hope that you found that useful. And of course, on this screen that you'll see that we can actually build the children's repertoire of story sentences. We don't just have to stick with one day. We can build a bank of opening, build-up, problem resolution, and ending sentences. So as they journey through the school, they'll acquire even more. And we can weave in those useful conjunctions and but so, because, when, where, and what, so that they don't over-rely on and then, and then, and then. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you fill your classrooms with storytelling.